Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to summarize Plato's Allegory of the Cave. The Allegory of the Cave can be found in Book 7 of the Republic. The Republic is probably Plato's most well-known dialogue, and it was written around 380 BC. Now, for the allegory, this is a conversation that is going on between Socrates and Glaucon. And Socrates asks Glaucon to imagine an underground cave in which people are shackled or chained, and they can only look straight ahead. They cannot look to the right or to the left. They can only look straight ahead to the wall that is in front of them. And on the wall that is in front of them, there are shadows being projected. And so these people that are shackled have been like this since birth. So those shadows on the wall is all they've ever seen, all they've ever known. Now, in this allegory, Socrates says that one of the prisoners escapes. And when the prisoner escapes, they look back and they see that there's actually a fire behind the prisoners at another level. And that it's that fire that is projecting the shapes, the shadows that they're seeing on the wall. Now, as you could imagine, when you're in a dark room and you turn and now all of a sudden there's this source of light, the prisoner was pained, right, by this light that he was now encountering. And so the prisoner continues ascending through the cave and eventually gets outside. When the prisoner gets outside, again experiencing intense pain. I'm sure that you're familiar with being in a dark room, right? Maybe you're inside the house, all the lights are off, and you go outside, the sun is shining bright. It takes a minute before you can see anything clearly. And so as the prisoner, the escaped prisoner's eyes are adjusting, he begins to be able to see more clearly. He can see the stone, the trees, the rocks. And then, eventually, the prisoner can see the sun. Now, as this prisoner has seen that everything they had focused on, everything that they had paid attention to prior, was just shadows, he, of course, is looking to get back into the cave and share with them, the rest of the prisoners, this news. Right? But as you can imagine, people who have been exposed to something all of their life are oftentimes resistant to the idea that everything that they've believed or something that has meant so much to them throughout life is actually false. And so the reception that the freed prisoner gets is not a welcoming one. In fact, the prisoners say that he's a madman, and that if somebody were to get loose, they should avoid ascending the cave, and that they should even possibly kill him. And so we have this picture of the people being persuaded that the shadows is all that is real. In fact, Socrates tells us that the experts in the cave are the ones who have learned to detail the shadows, the ones that have learned to predict when the shadows will appear and what the shadows sound like. And so there's kind of this moment where this escaped prisoner is claiming that the experts don't really know what is really true, but are merely experts in the shadows. Now, of course, the freed prisoner has a hard time, as he had a hard time ascending the cave and going out into the light after being in the dark so long. Equally, he has a hard time communicating clearly when coming back into the cave about the shadows and the things that the people are used to. Because just as we've experienced going from a very dark room out into the day where the sun is brightly shining, we've also experienced the opposite. You're outside, the sun is shining, you're adjusted to the really bright light, and then you go inside a dark room or a dark house. Now it takes a minute. right? You have to adjust to be able to see in the dark. And so this, of course, makes people question this freed prisoner, that in fact he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Maybe he's crazy. Okay. So what is this allegory all about? Right? Well, Socrates tells us what the allegory is about. Right? The prisoners are trapped in the world of shadows. Right? The prisoners are not aware of those things that are more real, that are more true. Instead, they're just aware of the shadows that they're able to see. Right? The shadows represent the visible world, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Getting outside of the cave is a kind of enlightenment. Getting outside of the cave is a kind of ascending to the world of forms, and we'll talk more about that in a second too. And then lastly, the sun is the good in Plato's philosophy. It's also important for us to recognize that while this allegory is talking about the process of education, the way that we attain that which is true, the way that we get to the good, right? This allegory also has a second meaning, and that is that this allegory is very much the story of Socrates, Plato's teacher. You see, Socrates had been charged with corrupting the youth of Athens and teaching strange things about the gods. And eventually, as a result of these charges and Socrates' attempt to defend himself ultimately failing, he's put to death. So this allegory very much points the reader to what had happened to Socrates. So this allegory, yes, it's about the process of attaining truth, of gaining knowledge, of encountering the good, but it is also about kind of the end of Socrates, the process that Socrates went through, and what ultimately led to his death. So I think that this allegory kind of touches on or implies three important teachings of Plato's. And this can be helpful if you have an assignment that's attached to this reading. Keeping these things in mind can help you interact with the text. So number one is the way that Plato believes we obtain knowledge. According to Plato, knowledge comes through reason, or by way of reason. Plato's what we call a rationalist. This is in contrast to someone we would call an empiricist. An empiricist believes that knowledge ultimately comes in by way of the senses. So all knowledge comes to us through the senses. According to Plato, all knowledge comes to us through reason. So Plato is a rationalist. And we see this when looking at the wall and the shadows. That's what we see, right? So for Plato, that wall of shadows is the world that is around us. It's the visible world. It's the world that we're encountering with our senses every day, right? A second important teaching of Plato's is the world of the forms, right? So for Plato, these shadows, right, are shadows of something. So we're encountering shadows with our senses, and these shadows are from something. They reflect something. And that thing they reflect is the world of the forms. Now, the world of the forms is not part of the physical world. The world of the forms is transcendent. It's beyond us, right? And it's not part of the material world. So that's another important aspect that you need to keep in mind. As the prisoner is ascending, the escaped prisoner is ascending the cave and seeing the light, seeing more clearly, this is a picture of someone through reason encountering or recollecting, if you know more of some of Plato's ideas, that which is true, that which is more true than what is in the cave, right? And so to then get out of the cave is to now encounter or ascend to the world of forms. And that's where true knowledge can be found, okay? And then the third major teaching to keep in mind for Plato is this idea of the good. So we talked about the world of the forms being that from which these shadows come, right? So, for example, we see a chair, right? Well, that chair is a shadow of the form of chair, right? You might have a pet running around, right? Your pet dog or your pet cat. That pet is a shadow of the form of dog or cat, right? So everything that we see, everything that we encounter is a shadow of the form that is in the world of the forms. And this, of course, raises some interesting questions that we can't get into all of them right now. But one of the things that you do want to note is that the forms are not all equal. There does seem to be a hierarchy to the forms, and the highest of the forms, the ultimate form for Plato, is the good. The good, sometimes the way that Plato talks about the good is almost the way that some may talk about a god. The rest of the forms come from the good, the rest of the forms kind of point to the good, but the good is the ultimate form. And that, in this allegory, is reflected by the sun. That is when you have ultimate kind of knowledge, right? That's when you've gotten knowledge of the good itself, is when that freed prisoner is able to look at the sun and see the sun itself. So yes, it's by the sun that other things are seen, and those are true things, those are the forms, but kind of the end goal of this ascent is to be able to get to the good. Okay. I'd like to leave you with a quote from Tom Morris's Philosophy for Dummies, where he actually talks about the allegory of the cave, and I think he leaves us with some interesting questions and thoughts to consider after reviewing the allegory of the cave. He writes, "What illusions are you living under right now? What things do you value that really lack the importance you attribute to them? What could you be ignoring that is really of true value? What assumptions are you making about your life that may be based on appearances and not realities? Most people are chained down by all sorts of illusions. It is the goal of philosophy, well done, to help us all break those chains." I hope that this was helpful to you as you engage with these works of Plato. I want to encourage you, continue to engage, continue to ask questions. Use videos like these to help you gain better understanding, but understand that listening to these videos, watching these videos doesn't replace reading the text itself. If you have any questions, if there's any way I can be of more help to you, please feel free to leave a comment down below. And please consider subscribing. I make videos like this and other videos that talk about philosophical issues. So be sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you know when new content is released.